So I have two practices. One is a Buddhist practice, and the other is a neurosurgeon. And the only similarity I thought at first was that one's intention was to improve wellness and reduce suffering, and the other is to promote health and cure disease. What I'm going to talk today is about what I learned by treating patients who have intractable epilepsy, which is epilepsy that the medications don't control. And as you know, people with epilepsy have these seizures that happen spontaneously without warning oftentimes. You lose consciousness, you fall, you hurt yourself, shake violently, lose your urine, bite your tongue. But worse than that, if the medications don't control it, you can't hold a job, you lose your license to drive. The medications at the high doses that you take just to control a little bit of your events, seizures, give you bad side effects, so your quality of life is really terrible. And the surgery we do can cure that. And the way you can describe a seizure is with an EEG, brain waves. And the normal brain, as you can see, each part of the brain is doing something different, and it's very variable over time. It's chaotic, which means unpredictable. And a seizure is when you have this hypersynchrony, when different parts of the brain are doing exactly the same thing, and it's this rhythm. So it's a major loss in complexity is what a seizure is. So a seizure is this loss in complexity. It's not linear, which is what a seizure is. Well, normal brain is very chaotic, and this is the kind of thing we want to sustain. But looking at this, there's something even more fundamental about health and well-being. When I speak with patients, I often give the analogy that a normal brain is a ballet, different parts doing different things, and a seizure is marching in step. And what we do is we find out where this marching in step occurs, and I go in and I cut that area out, or I implant devices that control the brain by either the normal parts helping to control the bad part, or just controlling the bad part with an implant like a pacemaker. But I didn't want to talk about neurosurgery today. I'm going to talk about what I learned about the fundamentals of the nervous system, because I realized there might be something important that we can apply to all of our health and well-being beyond just epilepsy. And clearly, health is a chaotic, complex process, at least in the nervous system, and sickness is a rhythm, and of course, a flatline EEG, that's death. So there's something about complexity that determines well-being. All these animals have something in common. They all have nervous systems, and they all can have seizures. The roundworm, 302 neurons, or the human, 85+ billion neurons, all exhibit health and illness. And the basic part is this sustaining complexity. So what's so fundamental about the nervous system? Well, they're made of these nerves, and all these nerves have the same characteristic. They have these branches, and these branches is one nerve connecting to other nerves. So it's this connection, this transfer of information. And when you think about the basic connections, they have feed-forward excitation, that's like addition. There's inhibition, that's like subtraction. There's convergence and divergence, that's multiplication and division. And then there are these loop things. Now, the loop things is really what I think is characteristic about basic neuronal processes. And yeah, talking about mathematics. So you have A with some rule, it goes to B, basic process. But the loop is where you have an N1 state, apply a rule, and you get an N state. So you have a cause, you have an effect, and that effect becomes a new cause. So there's something special about that loop. Turns out neurons aren't on all the time. They fire. They go on and off. And Alan Turing, the father of modern computers, digital computers, about 70 years ago, laid the groundwork for the theory of computers, even before there were digital computers. And he used this thing called a Turing machine, which nowadays we call cellular autonoma. And you can, this is a simple Turing machine. It's a bunch of cells. You give them states. In this case, the state is 0 or 1. And each cell turns into a new state once you apply a certain rule. And in this case, you take the original cell and the two neighboring cells, and you apply the rule, and the rule, an example of a rule is on the bottom. And so you have 8 different combinations of, and you have 8 different outcomes. And you apply that over and over and over again in different generations, and you get some interesting phenomena. Steve Wolfram, 20 years ago, studied these small computer systems exhaustively. And he found 2 important things. The diagrams on the left are successive iterations of the bunch of cells. So from the top is the first iteration, going down hundreds down to the bottom. And when it's on, you can see the patterns. And he discovered there are 4 different kinds of processes with any simple computation. He also, and the 4 different processes are a constant, a periodic self-similar process, a random process, or something that is very complex and structured. That's the first thing he discovered. And the second thing is that these small computational systems, when put together, can approximate or be any other computational systems. So one computer can emulate any other computer. A Mac can emulate a PC. These small computational systems equal any other computational system. And each one of them only has 4 kinds of output. Now, clearly, you look at this, and computational systems, the way the nervous system works, we have death, we have illness, and we have health. We have also this thing called random, but if you think about it, random is absolutely no information, and it's almost the same as a constant. But is there something fundamental about processes, not just the nervous system or neurons, but just processes in general? And perhaps there is. And we can think of chaotic, complex, structured, and unpredictable processes as health, and self-similar, repetitive, nested, and predictable processes is illness, and of course something that's constant is death, and something that's random is undefined, because there's nothing really random in organisms. So that's a fundamental thing about processes if one considers how the nervous system works. But what about how the nervous system is hooked up? It's hooked up in this thing called a small world network. And that small world network is basically you have a bunch of hubs that connect to other hubs that connect down the line so that every neuron is connected to every other neuron, and they're through these hubs. It's like a transportation system or any other network, and that's the network of the roundworm, and the humans have the same small world network characteristic in the way their neurons are hooked up. So a small world is really a balance between randomness and regularity, between global efficient communication or local communication. And it turns out if you study these small world networks and give each node a function, small world is more complex than regular or random. And if you start changing the small world more to a random or to a regular network, it loses its complexity. Not a week goes by in the neuroscience literature these days where a study is not published about a process or about the way it's hooked up where loss of complexity or loss of small worldness is not consistent with, say, an illness or less well-being of that network being studied. In fact, yesterday I read something about some science group looking at Einstein's brain, because he did have his brain preserved, and they looked at the connections between one hemisphere and the other, and he had a greater than average connectivity between the 2 hemispheres. No surprise, he probably had a greater, stronger small world network. So that's another fundamental thing. We have processes and we have structure. And it turns out that complex, chaotic, non-repetitive, highly variable, that's fully conscious. If you lose some of that unpredictability, if you lose some of the complexity, you might have reduced consciousness, as we see in depression, and that's been shown. And then, of course, if it's a major loss, like in epilepsy, oftentimes, you have loss of consciousness. Turns out that any interactive system is a network. And I've listed a few here. Internet is a major network, power systems, telecommunications, transportation systems. So a blizzard in Denver is going to make our airline transportation in North America much less healthy. So again, we can apply these ideas of processes and small world networks to the health and well-being of other things besides the nervous system. The other important thing are the rules. We talked about process, talked about structure, let's talk about rules. It doesn't take much of a change to go from one outcome to the other. In fact, Rule 122 compared to 110 is just a change in one of the ones, and that goes from something that mimics or models death to something that models health. So the rules are very sensitive to changes. So studying the nervous system and the way it's hooked up and the way it works, there are some fundamental ideas. And I think we can use these ideas, at least I try to in my life, to improve the well-being of what I do and how I interact with the world. And of course, that means choosing things that promote and sustain complexity. And there are three things that I think we can say, that the process is what's really important. It's the action, not the material. More stuff is not necessarily better. The nervous system of the roundworm can show exactly the same phenomena as the nervous system in a human. So it's, and they have, so 300 neurons versus billions of neurons. Also, the hallmarks of complexity are variation and change, and so avoiding closed-mindedness is an important idea that comes out of these basic fundamental things. Don't fear change. And of course, small processes can also produce important system changes. As we see, if we look at these rules, a very tiny change produces dramatic consequences. And so this is the hard part, is developing the wisdom to choose what is healthy. And oftentimes, it's very simple choices. So I can boil this down even more and say that more is not better. And avoid closed-mindedness. And to choose wisely. And these are the things I learned. But these are the primary Buddhist precepts: non-greed, non-hatred, and non-ignorance. So I started out saying I had two practices, and what I really learned is that I really only have one. Thank you.